I'm Kris Sims. I'm the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, filling in today. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day. If you haven't done so yet, remember to like this video, subscribe to Juno News, and most importantly, share this with your friends who need to know. Okay, lots to talk about. Unfortunately, we've got thousands of families in Southern Ontario who are being affected by the latest move from US President Donald Trump, who is basically saying, yeah, how about all the auto manufacturers come on over to this side of the border where we don't have an industrial carbon tax, and if not, I'm going to put tariffs on the vehicles that are coming across the border from Canada. So as you can imagine, this is causing a massive disruption, especially in the province of Ontario. What I found a little bit frustrating here is that we have Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who is big into some theatrics. So we remember him dumping out the bottle of Crown Royal, even though Crown Royal is literally manufactured in Gimli, Manitoba. And now we've got this news coming from the United States that's going to deeply affect the auto manufacturing sector. And the response from Ford towards Trump was not quite measured in his language. Let's listen to this.
My number one job is make sure we protect the people of Ontario. I need to protect the communities against that tyrant south of the border, which drives me absolutely nuts. That guy, President Trump, he's a real piece of work. You know something? What my message to the Prime Minister when I meet him on Thursday is, if you can't get a deal, let's start hitting him back. Let's start hitting the U.S. back hard.
So there's a few things there. One, the emotionalism is understandable because people are upset, people are getting laid off, people are losing jobs. Families are deeply affected by that. But at the end of the day, you have to step back and look at the big picture and realize what kind of fight you're in. So if Premier Ford is talking about fighting back and hitting back with bigger and stronger tariffs or something like that, all that's doing is, if you're in the middle of a fight, okay, and the guy's way bigger than you, the United States, and you know you're about to start throwing fists, having big tariffs, retaliatory tariffs, that's like punching yourself in the face first. Because tariffs are just trade taxes. They hurt people on both sides of the border. As the radio and TV ad that Ford is spending, I think, $70 million playing, as the radio and TV ad said, using the late US President Ronald Reagan's words, tariffs are generally a bad thing. Okay, they're just trade taxes. In order to get a deal with the United States, Canada should be wiser, smarter, and of cooler heads. Interestingly, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney clearly heard how Ford reacted there, and he was asked about it. Let's listen to Carney.
Prime Minister, you'll be meeting with Premier Ford later this afternoon. He's already come out and said he'd like to see you hit back, retaliate against new U.S. tariffs. So what's your message to him this afternoon? And does it include a new package of retaliatory action and trade action against the Trump administration?
Well, we start from a position where we have a better deal than any other country in the world with the United States. 85% of our trade is free. So we're starting from this stronger position. But we're also very acutely aware and very focused on the fact that we can make it better. And so we will do everything we can to make it better. There's times to hit back and there's times to talk, and right now is the time to talk.
Very different tone from what former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau likely would have said, right? Hear what he said there. That's what was very important, was that number that Carney just used there. He said that 85% of our trade with the United States is free trade. This is, again, why it's super important for people to understand this, of the billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of trade that goes across that Canada-US border. And why, when you're in the middle of a trade dispute and you're trying to make a deal with the guy who likes making deals, that's his thing, probably not a good idea to dump gasoline all over that. Okay? Very good idea for everybody's sake, especially taxpayers on this side of the Canadian border and working normal people on this side of the Canadian border. Much smarter idea to actually hammer out a renewed trade deal so that we aren't waking up every Wednesday morning wondering what could possibly be happening with new tariffs. So that kind of uncertainty is wreaking havoc on a lot of people. That's understandable. Carney's responsibility here and his team's responsibility here is to get a new deal with Washington. I will also point out that we pay experts within the Trade Department, okay? We pay experts who are bureaucrats, okay, in Ottawa, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year salary to do this. I'm not just talking about the politicians and Carney himself. There's permanent government in Ottawa whose job it is to hammer out deals like this, to anticipate problems like this, and to deal with them as adults. I'm going to get to a little bit more adulting here when it comes to things like the so-called EV mandate. Remember, Ottawa is still planning to ban the sale of gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles. It's costing Canadians around $50 million in commitments so far. Let's take a look at that in a moment. But first, let's hear a word from our sponsor.
Macamee College. So are you tired of politicians growing government while your freedoms shrink? Then don't just complain, take the lead. Our partners today, Macamee College, and their applied politics and public affairs program is for freedom-minded Canadians who want to hold the government accountable. In just 2 years, through online evening courses, you'll get the applied skills to run campaigns, organize grassroots movements, and shape policy. You'll get hands-on training in your community and with the party of your choice, so you graduate ready for real change. Now, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone you know, maybe it's your son or daughter, maybe it's your friend who's passionate about politics. Here is a chance to fast-track your career into making an impact. Plus, anyone who subscribes through our link and they are successful in enrolling in this course gets a $500 Juno News scholarship towards your education, because we need more small government leaders standing up for freedom, standing against big government overreach. Intakes are in September and January. Don't wait. It's time to lead. Use the link in the description today. Check it out over at candicemalcolm.com/Macamee. That's MAKAMI.
Okay, so the situation in Canada right now, when it comes to auto manufacturing, especially of electric vehicles, okay, battery-powered vehicles, is this. Prime Minister Mark Carney has delayed the ban on the sale of gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles by 1 year, okay? So that means in 1 year's time, right? So not in 2026, but coming up in 2027, they're going to start forcing car dealerships to sell a certain percentage of their new car sales as battery-powered vehicles. On top of that, Canadian taxpayers at the federal and Ontario level have committed more than $50 billion. Let's take a look at the stats here. This is, of course, from both Ottawa and Queen's Park combined. And it's a combination of just straight up, corporate welfare and subsidies and credits and all sorts of stuff. All told, more than $50 billion worth of commitments. So Stellantis, remember that name? LG, more than $18 billion. Volkswagen, last I checked, they weren't hard up for money. They're a huge multinational corporation. They're in this thing for $16 billion. Northvolt, $8 billion. Honda, $5 billion. And it goes on down the list there. So that is an enormous cost to taxpayers. On top of that, what's very telling is that when the incentives, okay, when you can't get the big tax credit anymore when you buy a battery-powered vehicle, once those incentives disappeared a little while ago, the natural demand, the natural sale of electric vehicles in Canada, last I looked at the quarterly update, was around 8%. 8! Single digit for natural sale and demand of battery-powered cars in Canada. What is going on here? How can we fix this? We're in a major war of words, especially when you consider what Doug Ford is saying at a Queen's Park. We're in a major war of words between two personalities, like Ontario Premier Doug Ford, which has a comparatively tiny population, compared to US President Donald Trump. How can we finally fix this? How can we get our economy rolling again? How can we maybe make a deal with our biggest trading partner? Let's find out. Joining me now is Professor Ian Lee. He is an associate professor with the Sprott School of Business in Ottawa, and an old friend of mine. I used to book Professor Ian Lee for Rob Snow Show back in the day on our radio days. Professor, so nice to see and hear you again.
It's good to see you and speak with you again, Kris.
So I watched your piece on CP24 and was listening to your take on what is going on with the trade dispute between Canada and the United States, and in particular, what is going on with the auto sector. If I can just get your bird's eye view first.
Sure.
You know,
I think it's very important because some people are so sort of deep in the weeds. You know, they hate Trump, they don't hate Trump, and he did, how dare he? And we got to step back. And I did a paper years ago on the auto pack. And I'm not going to bore everybody with history, but suffice to say, way back in 1965, the auto industry in Ontario, which is only really in southern Ontario, let's be frank, it was a little bit in Quebec and then it died away. So it's mostly southern Ontario from the get-go, 100 years ago. And it's always struggled in Canada. And then in 1965, it was in deep struggle. It was really having trouble. And so Lester Pearson, the Liberal Prime Minister, negotiated with the Americans Autopac, which basically, and I know liberal analyses don't put it this way, but I've characterized, because I speak very bluntly, and I don't like to, baffle gab and mislead. Autopac was to save the Canadian auto industry. And the reason, and I don't want people to think I'm attacking Canadians or saying how bad we are, not at all. They ran up against the problem we've always had in Canada. We're a huge country with a very tiny population. Kris, I want to use a line from Mackenzie King, of all people. It was a great line. I used it in class this morning. And he said, he was talking about Europe, actually, and this was in the context of the Second World War, just after. He said, the problem with Europe is they've got way too many people and not enough geography, meaning they're real close together and they're always fighting each other for 2,000 years. He said, but the problem with Canada is we've got way too much geography and not enough people. And I think that's a very funny way of putting it, a humorous way. Where I'm going with this, we've never had the economies of scale to become a manufacturing superpower. It has been the Laurentian, and I'm not being unkind when I say this, the Laurentian elites from the 60s until now, both federally and provincially in Ontario, promulgating this urban legend to Canadians, albeit with lots and lots and billions of dollars of subsidies from the governments, that we are going to create a manufacturing superpower. For those who believe in something I like to call arithmetic, and have studied and know a little bit about arithmetic and accounting, manufacturing around the world is hugely capital intensive. And it's also hugely R&D expensive. In plain English, you got to spend billions and billions. So what? Well, it means that the unit cost of widgets, of iPhones, of laptops, or whatever, is very expensive unless you can produce gazillions of them to get down the cost per widget. It's called economies of scale. So it's not an accident in the world today that the three giant manufacturing superpowers, China with 1.3 billion, Europe with over 500 million, and the United States with 340 million. Okay, that brings us back to Canada. So what? We have never had the scale, the size to be successful unless one of two things. We subsidize it up the wazoo with government money. We did that. And secondly, we could get access to the American market. We did that with Autopac. And then that morphed into NAFTA. Okay. It worked so long as the Americans let us go into their market. Well, 3 or 4 days ago, a guy called the President of the United States said, we're changing our policy. And that was confirmed by the Commerce Secretary. And so where I'm going with this, it doesn't matter whether I agree with Donald Trump or not. He's not asking me what my opinion is. And he's not asking all the angry people either. He said, we've made a decision. We want to make all the cars. We want to assemble them. And we're going to look after your cars by putting a great big tariff on it at the border, which will make it uneconomic to export those cars to the States. And just so everybody's got the big picture again, we export 80% of all the cars we make in Canada. Why do we export so much? Because our market for domestic buyers of cars is very tiny. It's tiny. So when people say, well, we'll just go it alone, what are we going to do? Buy 5 times as many cars as we do now? That's silly. I mean, we don't, if there was a demand for 5 times as many cars, we would be buying them already. And so what I'm trying to suggest to you is that this is the death knell, assuming he doesn't reverse his position. This is the death knell and the end of automotive manufacturing in Canada, in my judgment.
Astonishing to really put it that way, but the math is pretty grim. It's right there. Like numbers, what is it? Facts don't care about your feelings. The numbers are right there. I want to ask you a couple of things. One, it's a little bit more of an intricacy. So, yes, now with us trying to sell into the United States, that will become a problem. Ian, will this also affect the cross-border production of these cars? Because my understanding is that our auto manufacturing was so integrated that in some cases one car part could cross that Canada-US border like 6 or 8 times before finally landing in a
Kris,
vehicle to be sold. How will this change that interconnectivity?
Kris, you're absolutely right. There's two things I want to again, step back, big picture.
Yeah.
We make cars, and it's not that big. We've got 5 or 6 plants, and I think we make 1.2 million cars a year, which, on the grand, there's 75 million cars in the world, 17 million in the US, just to put it into context. We also have a very vibrant auto parts sector, and Trump explicitly said the other day, as did the Commerce Secretary, we're not going after your auto parts sector, and it employs way more people than automobiles. That's the first point. So this is not all doom and gloom that we're all going to fall over the cliff and come to an end or something. The second point is that what can be put together can be taken apart. Humpty Dumpty can fall down and be broken into pieces. And so what I'm trying to say is it's true about the parts going back and forth because of the integration of the two. Well, what he is doing in his brutal way, which he has become very famous for, he doesn't sit around and, say, let's have some good old fashioned academic debates, and he just goes in and blows them up.
Yep.
I'm going to bomb the Iranians. Well, you can't do that. Oh, yes, I can. He did. And I'm not here to defend what he's doing. I'm just saying if he wants to blow up those and tells the auto companies, you will not be able to import those cars from Canada because I'm putting a great big tax on them, tariff, then it will become uneconomic. And therefore, the companies will then redesign and re-engineer their value chains. Now, the interesting question for me is yet to be determined, which is how much of that stuff that goes back and forth will be classified as auto parts as opposed to the finished car. Because he said, I'm only going to put the tariff on the finished car. He said, I'm not going to go after the auto parts. Well, remember, auto parts go back and forth because every car is comprised, according to a fascinating book I read, not electric cars, but gasoline cars, 17,000 parts in the average car. Now that's everything, radios and tires and, everything.
Yeah.
So whether it's 17,000, 15, there's a lot of bits and pieces in a car.
That's fascinating, really. Yeah.
It is. And so we may dodge part of the bullet by saying, okay, we'll classify those as auto parts, which go back and forth, and we'll continue doing that. But what I'm trying to say is this. There's only 7, I believe it's 7. I looked it up, and there's 7 auto parts factories in Canada. As these tariffs are kicking in, as the auto companies crunch the numbers and they figure out how it's going to affect their bottom line, I'm making not a very profound statement. Auto companies, like any company, are not in business to lose money. And if they determine that plant producing those cars is losing money, they're going to close it down. And they're going to say, we're going to relocate it, just as Jeep just did. Chrysler Jeep moved the Compass from the Brampton plant to the U.S. So people say, well, it can't be done because they're all integrated. Well, my answer to those people is it just happened. It just happened. Can't be done. It did. And that's what I think is going to happen. It's going to be driven by the economics. Companies aren't in business to lose money. And so if he sets the tariffs in such a way that to design to hit those 7 plants, then they won't be exporting to the States. And if they're not exporting to the States, the market here is vastly far too small for them to survive. And again, it's this. And by the way, these arguments, when I hear politicians and so forth and pundits, well, we'll develop our own manufacturing center. We'll build fighter airplanes and we'll build, icebreakers and ships.
Sell to whom? And sell to whom?
We're 40 million people.
I know.
We're tiny. Look, somebody threw the example at me. What about Volvo in Sweden? Yeah, Volvo exports massively to Europe. I've been to Europe many times, and there's Volvo trucks and cars all over Europe. You need a big honking market called the United States or Europe. And by the way, in manufacturing, all three markets now protect their markets from foreigners.
We did have a big honking market
We
to our
do.
south that we were getting along fine with,
That's right.
in human standards. I gotta ask you, I know you're not a mind reader, but do you think this could have been avoided? This terrible thing that we've got going on with US President Donald Trump. I've read The Art of the Deal. I can kind
Yeah.
of see generally what he's doing and where he's going. I think you might have read that book as well. You're obviously got a good business brain for real. Like you teach kids
Yeah.
about this all the time.
Yeah.
Could have this been avoided? I feel like it could have.
I
Do
am
you think this could have been avoided?
I am of the same school, and I'm just saying this now to agree with you. I've been saying this since Trump got elected.
Yeah.
And I argued, people didn't like what I argued. The people that heard it, said, "Oh, you're crazy." I said, look at that list on the United States Trade Rep annual report to Congress that goes all the way back to the Clinton years, a third of a century, that lists the irritants. And we know what they are. They are not secret. And Donald Trump's been screaming about them for 10 years. Supply management,
Mhm.
telecom, keeping out American telecom companies,
Mhm.
airlines, banking, all of our restricted, and the Fraser Institute says about a third of our industry is protected to some degree against foreign competition, which means American mostly. And what I argued was this, Kris. I said, if we, Carney, had gone to them and said, look, we understand this list of 5 or 6 or maybe 7 protected industries are driving you crazy. We will get rid of them all in exchange for you no tariffs on us whatsoever, and all our goods, including autos, move tariff-free into the States. And then we could have thrown in as a sort of a bonus, we could have said, and we undertake to develop our critical minerals and become your preferred supplier because China has you by the neck. And
Yep.
I think we could have done a deal. In other words, make, that great old line from Hollywood, make him an offer you can't refuse. He can't refuse. And
Yeah.
if we had made an offer he couldn't refuse, I don't think he would have refused. We didn't make that offer. We said, oh no, we got to protect supply management. We put through a new bill in Parliament saying, oh, we can't disband supply management, which is just absurd. It's benefiting 8,000 dairy farmers to exploit 40 million Canadians with higher dairy and poultry prices.
Because we
Could have
refused to budge on it.
we
Yep.
could have done a deal.
And we know that he's keen on deals. Two more things. I got to bring this in really quickly, just if you want to touch on it. What did you think about the waving around the name of the Keystone XL pipeline? Because we know that that went right up to the border, and then Biden said no, and then Trudeau didn't put up any fight as soon as Biden said no to that. He's like, oh, please knock me over with a feather. We've got 2 different leaders in now. Definitely a different one with Trump. Do you think that actually could be greenlit and start supplying more gasoline and oil products to the States?
I do.
With Keystone? Okay.
I supported Keystone at the beginning. I supported before it was ever turned down. Actually, Kris, let me step back and sort of go even more meta on this.
Okay.
I've been arguing that for 70 years, the Laurentian elites have believed, they deeply believe, and I think they're profoundly wrong. They believed in this vision for Canada that we were going resources. They've said repeatedly for 70 years, very public, very clear, right up to Guilbeault. Resources are dirty. They're bad. They're low tech. They're harmful to Canadians. Hewers of wood, drawers of water, and we got to turn ourselves into a manufacturing superpower. Hence Bombardier, which I predicted 20 years ago was going to fail, not because we don't have good technicians and good engineers, but because I said Airbus and Boeing are never in a million years going to let us go in and take some of their market share and cause them to lay off some of their workers with our subsidized company. That was the logic. It wasn't about the quality of the plane. Well, great plane. I said, little pipsqueak mouse is not going to take on the giant and defeat Airbus, owned by the 4 European countries. And so the same logic here. What I'm arguing is the following, Kris. I'm arguing we've made a mistake for 70 years. The macro direction of the country on betting the farm on manufacturing for Southern Ontario. What we've got to do is pivot. We've never, ever had a comparative advantage in manufacturing in anything. We have had a comparative advantage in resources from before Canada existed because the mountains and the rocks and the trees and the minerals in the ground were there for millions of years.
Yep.
And we have trillions, I mean trillions in the ground. I don't just mean oil. I just don't mean gas, nuclear, potash, agriculture, you name it, we've got it. And we should be saying we're going to walk away from manufacturing like Australia did in 2017. They don't make a single car anymore. They're all imported. And we're going to develop the resource sector. We're going to develop pipelines. We're going to develop Churchill. We're going to develop Northern BC. We are going to become truly a world resource superpower. And the money will flow in because there are mining companies and investors around the world who realize the world wants our resources. As the German chancellor said, I don't want your cars. I want your LNG. And the Japanese said the same thing. So did the South Koreans, so did the Chinese. We have a huge advantage in resources writ large. We have never had an advantage in comparative in manufacturing, which is why we've had to beg the Americans to let us sell cars to the United States. And it was good so long as they said yes until they said no. And now this is a point where we can finally make the correct decision to correct the mistake of the last 70 years.
Two last questions. You mentioned EVs a little bit there. And I mentioned off the top while I was introducing you during this segment that we have poured billions and billions of dollars of subsidies into this EV. I will call it a mess because the Taxpayers Federation, we're pointing out we don't have the money for this. We don't have the energy for this. We don't have all the plugins for all of our little Trudeau trolleys, as I used to call them. And also the government shouldn't tell you what kind of vehicle you're able to purchase and to drive. So I wanted to get your take on what's going on with the so-called EV mandate. Now, we know that Carney has delayed this by a year, but I also know he wrote an entire book about how much he loves this stuff. So where is this going with the so-called EV mandate in Canada, and how does it tie in to our current dispute or fight we're losing with the United States?
Kris, I really mean this now. I'm sort of putting on a sort of a policy political hat. I think there's two Mark Carneys. I really do. There's Mark Carney, PhD economics, who worked 10 years at Goldman Sachs, which is a very capitalist enterprise. I worked 10 years in banking, commercial banking, BMO, a wonderful bank, by the way, and Goldman Sachs. There's no Marxist Leninists in any of the banks, okay? They're very, very capitalist institutions. And then, of course, he was a central banker. That's the Mark Carney, let's call that the business Mark Carney. And then there's the Mark Carney that wrote that book. And I thought, and maybe I don't know him, I've never been in his head, but I thought he wrote that to appeal to all the progressives and the red liberals in the Liberal Party, because he knew he was going to run for the leadership. And so he wanted to make sure they weren't going to attack him as being a quote banker type, That's what my take was. But I did say to everybody, in fact, in my interviews, I said, let's wait and see his decisions and see where he goes, because that's going to reveal who the real Mark Carney is. So far, he hasn't done as much as I wanted him to, but he's done more than many expected him to. He has come out and he's even musing now. The latest musing is he might maybe get rid of the tanker ban, which is a terrible act that was trying to destroy the oil and gas industry of Alberta. And it didn't change the world global warming by one iota. And he may change his views again on pipelines. So I think he's incrementally trying to move the country more, if you will, to a more pro-resource situation frame. And the reason why it's not just a value assertion. Mark Carney, if you work in a bank, and I'm saying this as somebody who worked 10 years in a bank, you know how to count, you know arithmetic, you know economics. And he has looked at the data. He's looked at the numbers, the same numbers I look at that anybody can look at, the macroeconomic data. And we are in deep doo-doo. And because of many, many very destructive policies of Justin Trudeau, our productivity is going down like a stone. I showed this morning in class because a lot of students think, we're the same as the Americans. GDP per capita, which is one of the major indicators of how wealthy a country is. This is average income per person. $56,000 for Canada, expressed in US dollars. US, 89. They're 50% wealthier per human being. And this isn't to say we're bad. It's just because we have so much protectionism and so much of the anti-resource development and anti-business and anti-foreign investment policies of the last many years that it's reduced and driven down our productivity, and we are paying a huge price. Mark Carney knows this. There's all kinds of reports out there from David Dodge, the former central bank governor, and other people showing the C.D. Howe Research Institute, the Fraser. And so I think he knows that. He's way too smart to deny this. And so I think he realizes, look, the only way out of this conundrum, this decline in our long-term decline in our prosperity, is to pivot towards resources because the whole world needs them. They're very valuable and they're only going up. Gold's going up, not going down. Lithium's going up, not down, and so on. So I think he realizes that, but he also realizes there's a significant minority in the country that are very hostile. Call them the Guibos of the world, and the Justin Trudeaus of the world, and they vote. And so he's got to bring them along with him to convince them that that's the way to go. And so that's why I think he wrote that book. And I think the real Mark Carney is more supportive of economic growth and resources than he is of what he wrote in that book.
I really hope you're right. Last question. We've got this dispute with China. So they've got some serious tariffs on our products coming out of the prairies here. I'm here in Lethbridge, Alberta. And so you hear about it all the time.
Yes.
And now we're hearing about, why don't we open up our market to what I would describe as cheap battery-powered Chinese vehicles? I actually don't know what you think about this, so I'm wanting to know your answer. If we did that, and we had these Chinese battery-powered vehicles over here in Canada all of a sudden, how would that alter our current dispute with U.S. President Donald Trump and the United States?
I've been back and forth in my own head with myself. I'm having arguments with myself in the last little while. First off, because my late mother came from Saskatchewan, from a farm in Saskatchewan, and I'm very, very aware of the importance of the resources and agriculture to the West, and canola, for example. And I know they're really taking it in the neck because of the batteries, because of the tariff we put on their cars. That's point one. Point two. And nobody's talking about this, including my friend Brian Kingston, who's the head of the Auto Manufacturers Association. We do not make inexpensive EVs in Canada. There is no such creature. They're all $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 or more, like the Teslas. They are not ordinary working class, middle class cars. Point three, you're right about China. We don't want to become dependent on them because it is in a regime that can't be trusted. Let's be frank. So I'm looking at all these and saying, we could I've been thinking about this for quite some time. We could say, okay, look, we don't make any EVs in Canada, less than whatever we can determine it very quickly. Let's say it's 60,000. I think it's probably 60,000. So why not allow Chinese EVs into Canada tariff-free under 60,000, and above 60,000, they'll be tariffed to protect our domestic EV industry to the extent that it exists. The Chinese, and I've been teaching in China, by the way, full disclosure, and I don't consult with the Chinese government. I've been teaching there since 1997, once a year, every year. In fact, I'll be there in April. And my students, these are EMBA. These are people in their mid-20s and 30s, well up the corporate ladder. And they all have Chinese EVs. And they pick me up. They have turns, okay, I'll pick you up on Friday morning from the hotel and drive you to class. I'll take you home Friday night. So I've driven in the last 10 or 12 years, I think I've driven and sat in just about every Chinese EV. And I can tell you this, Kris, and there's a new report out from the IEA, the world EV market. China has 60% market share in the world EV market. And I'm not saying this to take sides on this, but China is so far ahead of Canada and the United States and the Europeans on EVs. It's not funny. They are winning. Now, yes, they poured gazillions into it. Yes, they did all kinds of things that we don't agree with. But I'm not going there. I'm just saying they are ahead of us on EVs. They are selling an $15,000 USD Gull, it's called the Gull, into Brazil. Imagine being able to buy an electric car for $15,000. There's no way in God's green earth that Ford, GM, or Chrysler, or Honda, or Toyota can do that, or Tesla. They just can't. So, if we want to go or encourage the EV industry, or we want to encourage people to go EVs, well, one way would be to say allow the Chinese in at the low end of the market. But then I do understand the arguments for not allowing them in. But if we do, then we're basically kissing goodbye to a big portion of our Western agriculture. And I don't think that's right either.
My goodness, Ian Lee, we are sorry. Is there anything else you want to make sure our listeners and our viewers know about this, either the current fight that we're in with the United States, like the main message you would like to give there, or with this idea of having a lot of EVs in Canada?
Well, my overarching is that I this could be a blessing in disguise that he is basically putting a tariff, not basically, he's putting a tariff on our cars being exported in, which I believe, as I've said, is going to close down the industry. This could be the driving force that causes us to reframe our whole country's policy and our direction. So maybe if, and in other words, pivot to resources. The takeaway that I'm making is we have gone down the wrong road for 70 years, saying we're going to build cars or airplanes, bombardiers or whatever, and become a manufacturing superpower. It was never going to happen. We don't have the economies of scale. We don't have the population size. We do have resources that are unparalleled, or probably only exceeded by Russia, because it's a physically larger country, almost double the size geographically of Canada. So we should be saying we're going to develop all our resources. I'm talking agriculture. I'm talking potash. I'm talking nuclear. I'm talking electricity. I'm talking timber in British Columbia. I'm talking oil. I'm talking gas. I'm talking pipelines. All of the above, and stop talking about manufacturing, which is 2%. One more quick metric, Chris. In 1970, when Pierre Trudeau was in his first term, manufacturing was 1/3 of Canadian GDP. Today, it's 10%, and autos are only 2%. So the idea that Canada is desperately dependent on automotive manufacturing is not supported empirically by the data.
Professor Ian Lee, Sprott School of Business in Ottawa, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks very much, Chris. Really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Me too. Once again, folks, this is why it's important to support independent media. And also, to be fair, Professor Ian Lee is often on mainstream media and talk radio. As you can tell, the guy's had a lot of experience. The man is super smart. I strongly recommend you check out some of his teachings. You can find a lot of his writings online if you just look him up. That is, once again, Professor Ian Lee. He is with the Sprott School of Business. Some of those numbers and analysis he's giving over the auto manufacturing sector were pretty stark, eh? What do you guys think? What do you think about what the professor said? What do you think about having Chinese EVs in Canada? Now, at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we've been sounding the alarm on this ban on the sale of gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles now for years, because we don't have the money for this. We've been blowing billions of dollars on subsidies to big multinational corporations that do not need your tax dollars, and we don't have the electricity for this. If everybody in Canada suddenly plugged in their vehicle that they already own, we would need more than 14 brand new CANDU reactors. Those are those big nuclear reactors that we see in Southern Ontario, and we're not building any anymore. Those things cost around $12 or $15 billion with a B each. So we don't have the money for this, and people aren't purchasing EVs. I think the last time I checked the quarterly financials, the natural demand and sale of EVs in Canada without all these crazy subsidies was around 8%. 8, single digit. So what's going to happen in the future? What do you think about what the professor said with our relationship with the United States? Please leave a comment underneath this video. And if you have not yet done so, make sure you like this video and share it with your friends who need to know.